I was going to say, as usual, I feel honoured to be here because it is, in my case, quite usual. For 15 years, IBBC has been dominating our discussions and forcing us to think about the present and the future. And of those 15 years, I think I'm right in saying you've asked me very kindly to come back for 9 of them. So presumably, I haven't yet said anything so offensive to keep me away. But anyway, it is wonderful to be here. What you do is so admirable. There's such an excellent atmosphere here. And of course, you have such excellent leadership, notably the famous Emma Nicholson, Baron Nicholson, who is really the embodiment of admiration and understanding for Iraq, which I assert here. I'm not a member of the government, but I assert that British attitude to Iraq remains more than ever one of admiration and respect for a great nation and hope that we can, in the turmoil of events in the world, do everything we can. We have to look after ourselves as well, of course, do everything we can to support our friends, and we regard Iraq as our very big friend indeed. Where are we all going together? Well, on a personal note, I have to say it's a great relief being here rather than being in a general election meeting, of which we've had many, and they're not a pleasant experience. They're not a pleasant experience. I've fought as Member of Parliament in 10 elections myself, and I'm still a Member of Parliament, but not the sort you think. I'm the sort that doesn't have to fight for elections anymore. We sit in the other house, the higher house, and try and concentrate on longer-term issues, which we do with some success. I think our reports are widely read. But of course, we're not the leading house, and we don't have the final say in this democratic age. It is the House of Commons which prevails. Now, what can it's silly to tell great experts like you about events in your own country, which you know 1,000 times better than I do. But just let me say a few words about this country that you're in and you've taken the trouble to visit already here, and which you will have heard from Emma and others about. We are, yes, we're one of 70 countries having an election this year, and obviously our own is the one we're concentrating on. The result will take place on Thursday, the voting, and the result will be with us late Thursday night and into the morning of Friday, July the 5th. That is what is coming. I have to say that I've listened to the election debates with horror. In fact, I'd even say with disgust, because they are so unrelated to the real issues which are concerning the British people. After all, it's my own people. They are so unrelated to our longer-term interests and those of the wider world. We are conducting an election, as it were, on another planet. The issues are trivial. The issues are inward-looking. The issues are responses to short-termism and short-term populism in particular, and they ignore the basic fact, which you can derive from looking at the last 5 or 6 governments in this country, let alone any other country, that most of the promises made at election time, we will not increase this tax, we will increase that one, we will do this, we won't do that, are all invalidated every time. Every time all these promises are made, every time it is external forces and external issues in this globalized world we live in, which confound and invalidate the objectives. And none of these undertakings, or very, very few of them, ever get near the light of day and are ever fulfilled. And therefore, the more we hear about detailed undertakings from our party political leaders, the more we need to shrug our shoulders and recognize that our eyes should be on the great, powerful undercurrents, and new forces which are reshaping the world and reshaping all our lives down to the very humblest level. I opened the papers this morning and I saw one of them. I'm not going to get partisan, but I saw one of the prominent leaders in this election saying what was his aim, and it was, quote, "I want people to say that we made them better off." That's pretty banal anyway. But where's he been? Is he not aware that we live in a world on fire? Is he not aware that we live in a world where some of the dangers, although they're like low fires burning, could suddenly spring up, and all of us, you, us in this country, could catch that fire very, very quickly indeed. The eyes of sensible people, and a lot of the British people are extremely sensible, should be turned rightly to cool and sensible analysis of what we can do to contribute to a reasonable degree of stability, a reasonable protection from danger, and in fact, really in many cases, survival. I don't want to compare us too much with the 1930s and 1940s, where, again, this nation and many others in Europe were reminded that the choice was survival or suppression, disorder, chaos. But although there is no sort of war at that level, there is certainly war around, as you're well aware, and as I am well aware, and these wars can, in many hotspots in the globe, come together and cause very, very great danger, interruption to people's lives. So I'm so pleased to be here, because it's so much nicer than listening to meetings where one wonders whether the language is right even. Is this the right language? People are being promised all the better things, better pensions, make work pay, more on this, more on that, cutting taxes and so on and so forth. Is that the language? Shouldn't they be talking about survival? Shouldn't they be talking about the very stark choices that are going to face nations in trying to keep together, to keep united in an age when the glue and cement maintaining and solidifying national loyalties and national purpose are all being melted very fast indeed, and all our great advisors and philosophers, and I do now, I've just finished hosting a podcast series of 12 of the most wisest people I know on this planet in Asia, Africa, Europe, America, and here in Northern Europe, and all of them say, look out, trust is collapsing everywhere, trust and respect are disappearing. Even down at the level of the family, are our children placing the trust in their parents in this age of zombies, in this age of connectivity, in this age of mass overload of information, much of it totally misleading, particularly on the social media. That's respect gone there. At the local community, do local communities respect the national authorities? Frankly, in this country, no, they don't. Members of Parliament are widely distrusted. Parliament is widely criticised. All the way up the hierarchy of governance, people are condemned out of hand, regardless of any evidence. The area of praise remains and reassurance in our monarchy and our royal family. That holds us together. But a healthy society, which we must be, is one which needs to be at peace with itself and not over-divided. There'll always be divisions, of course, not over-divided. And the monarchy is a marvellous blessing, but we need leaders and governance that we can respect. And I think if we respect them, they should be talking a different language. They should be talking the language of survival in conditions which are going to be very difficult to preserve our present living standards and safety and civilian safety and stability. And without the stability, we will never get the investment, and without the investment, we'll never get any talk of growth. A colossal naivety prevails in a lot of public policy. Growth is a very good example. You listen to a politician, you'll hear them saying, it's all right, chaps, in government we're going to pull a lever, mark growth, and it'll all grow. There's going to be a magic growth tree along with a magic money tree. There isn't. There is no magic money tree. There is no magic growth tree. And the idea that it can all be switched on and things can suddenly get better, rather than we should be using every ingenuity to prevent things getting worse, simply hasn't penetrated the political debate. Now, I'm not going to talk too long about the world on fire, because you know about it as well as we do. But we know at this moment people are dying, people are being slaughtered in the horror spots of the world, in the Donbass. and near Kiev and Kharkiv and places. We know that in the Middle East, two interests and races, as it were, face each other, determined to destroy each other. Not determined to end destroying each other, not determined to talk, but to destroy each other. That, of course, is Israel wishes to see, under its present leadership, wishes to see Hamas off the face of the earth, destroyed, and Hamas wishes to see Israel destroyed off the face of the earth. So the chances, the immediate chances of any kind of diplomacy and exchange working in that area are very, very grim indeed. The eye is at the moment off Taliban and Afghanistan, but the situation is grim and again full of the dark forces which must be resisted. Never mind about ideology, never mind about left and right. These are dark forces, particularly those which are preventing women playing a proper role in society, or indeed any role at all. And it's a dangerous world, and it's a fostering seedbed for every kind of terrorist violence in exchange for democratic discussion and deliberation, which of course are the essence of a democratic and stable society. So lots of dangers there, lots of dangers in Syria, which is a horror story still. Egypt is not very strong at the moment at all. You yourselves are facing a neighbor who is difficult and has certain standards which, frankly, I think the generality of the human race who are generous would not necessarily endorse, and some terrible things have been going on there. These are easy things to stand here and list, but the point is a much deeper one. There are massive currents at work, deep currents, deep underneath, which are working to undermine deliberative, calm, sensible, friendly, respectful disagreement, which is democracy, undermine the system of capitalist business, which requires a sense of justice and fairness, because if people don't trust each other and regard the business as just, it doesn't happen. If there isn't trust and trustworthiness, trust by the seller, trustworthiness in the buyer, or the other way around, if you like, if those sentiments don't prevail, then there can be no business and no prosperity and no stability of any kind. So all these they're enemies. They're not the old-fashioned philosophical doctrinal enemies. We used to argue at school about left and right. Is the state should be bigger, should it be smaller? Do we can look at the state as the enemy or the friend, and so on? All that's gone. We're living in a world where those sort of 20th and 19th century ideological arguments have no relevance at all. The relevance is in how we combine the nature of an efficient modern state and the provision of services that people expect with the readiness of the citizen to obey, to pay the taxes, to observe the rule of law, and to work within the framework of the state and within the framework of the Constitution. It's not happening here. It's not happening here. A lot of our services are getting very, very shabby. I just came to this Mansion House, which I've been to hundreds of times, by the London Underground. And I walked through Mansion House station, and I trod through the rubbish, and I noticed the lift was broken and full of rubbish. The passages were dirty. Several had been blocked off by workmen without any warning. The trains run, but I said, this is not the smart, sensible, prosperous world that I thought I'd lived in. This is a little corner, a little visible, tiny corner of a pattern of services which the state is finding it very hard to keep up. And why? Why? Because we're living in an age which very few political debaters seem to understand, in which the state is being asked to do more and more and more, and to look after people more and more effectively, and finding it more and more difficult to do so. So it's getting bigger, very much bigger, but also weaker. And instead we're seeing, or put it more crudely, the state has the ambitions and the duties to look after us, to defend us, to prevent us from crime, but it's the private sector that has the money. The sovereign wealth funds, the pension funds in this country are worth several trillion, the insurance funds the same. They're not investing in Britain. They're not investing here. They used to. Our pension funds used to invest 40% of their income here, not just in bonds, but actually in enterprise as well. Now it's about 4%. Now the money is either sitting in bonds or going elsewhere or sitting in deposits. So that's why the Mansion House lift is full of rubbish. That's why all sorts of things don't work that should, and that's why, as a nation, when it's clearly our duty and our friendship to support our friends, including the great nation of Iraq, where it needs support, or indeed have support from them, that is why we're not able to do all that we would like to do, and we must do more. But more means efficiency, and a nation that's internally reasonably at peace with itself, who can then play a role in maintaining or strengthening the democracies of the world, which are not so much failing as under attack. Democracies are everywhere, and systems of government that encourage discussion, not necessarily demanding consensus, you can't get that on everything, but demanding a civilized discussion and agreement on the majority decision, all need support and endless argument and consistent, continuous frontier fighting against the much darker forces and sampled remedies which are not democratic, which are frightening, and which always, always end in terrifying violence and the death of many innocent people. That's what's happening. So let me close down on that and just add a word on two other issues, which I know that perhaps much more immediate to your concerns here, which are investment and development of the resources of peoples and materials in our respective nations. One of the arguments that is rattling around a bit in our election is climate change and energy transition. And the parties have got their ideas on how we move from the pattern of the world of the last 150 years, which is based on fossil fuels, to one which is somehow limits emissions and somehow curbs the effect of glasshouse overheating and incineration by the effect of that glasshouse heating. And this is a worry, and the younger generation are particularly concerned, obviously, more than those of us who won't be here. And we all have to take very sensible and mature views on the pace at which we can reform. The change is coming. There is an energy transition movement happening, but there is a terrible division as to how that should be managed. Those who want to rush with it because they say, in a few weeks' time, it's the end of the world, unless we get things right by 20-something, 35, 45, 50, whatever it is, we will be, we'll all be fried, and the world will be destroyed, versus those who say, now, wait a minute, we must take these things with consent. We must pursue matters with sensible planning. And for those of you who have been central to the provision of the fossil fuel order, or in the last 100 years at any rate, after coal, after whale oil, after that sort of thing, until we reach the age of oil and gas, this is very difficult because you've got to invest, you've got to take long-term decisions, and yet you've got to listen to two separate sources of advice. One says, stop oil, stop gas, and do anything to make governments do that somehow. These people are around in our country, they're very dangerous because they're not interested in reason and listening. They're not interested in the fact that 85% of the world continues, understandably, to be on fossil fuels, and that if you literally stopped it, I don't know how it could be done, but if you did, you would actually freeze or destroy hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. They're simply not open to that fact. And I think Iraq is placed in a very difficult but important position. You've got 115 billion barrels of oil in your reserves. You're superbly placed with vast investment and huge skills in providing what the world demands. The world is likely, in my view, to demand a continuous of its total energy use up to 2050, I think about 70 or 80% is going to be oil and gas anyway. You've got to invest so as to produce it. Very, very difficult decisions indeed. Decisions which will have to go through a proper democratic filter of discussion and realism rather than through assertions and bubbles and the kind of polarized debate which unfortunately is emerging as a result of us living in the age of the internet, the microchip, and the instant reply to every instant question. In effect, the destruction of the middle deliberative ground on which, again, democracy grows, because it doesn't grow on extremes at all. So those are the difficulties for you. I'd hesitate to advise, except to say to all those who are seriously concerned about the energy transition and whether it's working, which of course it isn't at the moment, as you know. In yesterday's papers, you can see that world emissions are rising faster than ever. So it's not working at the moment, but working it must. Then the pace is the thing. The pace and the management and the consent are the key ingredients. And every time governments, even here in this country, attempt to ignore consent and push things too fast, it always backfires. It always ends up in a slower, worse position than when you started. It's always a question of more haste, less speed. Finally, let me turn to the biggest issue of all, which is much covered in books, particularly here in the United States, about whether in this instant polarized, angry atmosphere of division and assertion of minority views, now all empowered, of course, by the mobile in my pocket or the iPad in their case or whatever it is, and the 17 trillion messages that are exchanged every day across the planet, whether they whether that kind of atmosphere is one in which our democracy can survive and prosper, or whether it can be undermined. And that's your problem just as much, I have to say, it is ours as well here. Although we pride ourselves as a cradle of democracy, and we do try very hard to maintain the rule of law, the freedom of speech, the freedom of the independence of judges, the aspiration to regular elections, the deliberative and respectful nature of debate, and so on, all the ingredients of democracy, a lot of which can't be put in laws at all, incidentally. A lot of democracy does not lie in laws, it lies in people. It lies in, and there are some basic constitutional imperatives that we must all hang on to. Can we do that? Or is it becoming almost impossible in the flood of information and the flood of overload and the flood of deep fake and the rise of AI, where you simply mean you can't actually, we used to say seeing is believing, but if you can't believe what you see. You cannot believe what you're actually seeing. So that if all this is going on, maintaining the level state of mind to be democratic, to trust, to have loyalty, to respect history, real history, not manufactured history, very, very difficult indeed. Now, I think it can be done. Again, when those 12 philosophers I mentioned, we've just had on a podcast, all thought that the situation was very dangerous but could be repaired if we recognize what the real dangers are. Or put it in homely terms, if you know where the roof is leaking, at least you can start mending the leaks. But if you don't even know where the dangers are coming from, then you're in a much worse condition. So these are the tasks before us. We're trying to mend our democracy. I think I would say to our political leaders not to produce beer and skittles and maypole dancing and glory and happiness around the corner. It isn't nirvana around the corner. It is to survive, to maintain, to conserve our values above all, and within those values, or upon those values, to conserve a reasonable standard of life that we've built up over years and years of peace since the ends of the wars of the 20th century. I think it can be done. It does require very clear thinking, not just about East versus West, out-of-date concepts, no such thing as the West, and no such thing as the East. There are differences of view and style around the world, but they can't be just divided in two, cut in half like an orange. There are no easy solutions to any of these things. The message for electors, when their votes are being sought, ought to be times are going to be extremely difficult for the richest countries and indeed for those who are still moving up the ladder to prosperity and stability. The great engines of the last 100 years in maintaining peace and prosperity are looking a bit shaky. They're coughing, they're hiccuping. The United States is in real difficulties. It's not just a question of elderly men fighting each other, which neither of whom people feel are suitable for the job. It is divisions between the states who held the federal union together, and divisiveness and abandonment of center ground and sensible, calm debate on a colossal scale. That makes America not poor, but a much less reliable part of the whole global world order than it has been since the Second World War in 1945. Other countries all around us, I'm reading about my own country this morning. I was also reading about France, where they look as though doctrines which could break up international patterns, could break up the necessary, instead of weaving together nations to deal with the pandemics, the immigration crisis, the undermining of the rule of law, which is collapsing before our eyes in places like Ukraine. Instead of dealing with those issues, or the need for clean energy to save the planet, they are leading instead to cross-division and disagreement on a constant and tragic scale. So those are the dangers. I'm not being too much of a gloomster, because I believe there's a golden thread running through all this that if we pick it up, can hold things together. But I am saying that please, nations like Iraq, nations like Britain should realize where their friends lie, stick together, always listen to each other, avoid the old flaws and where diplomats sort of preach to everybody else as though they know best. They don't, and understand that democracy requires working at every day and night. If we do that, we can produce, I think, a low emissions world, a cleaner energy world in due course, carefully paced, with full cooperation of the great nations of the past fossil fuel era, including Iraq, obviously, including Saudi Arabia, including other key Middle East countries. If we can somehow put the fire out that began on the horrors of the Israeli massacre of October the 8th last year, although, of course, the underlying conditions were there all along. If we can do all these things, then there is a chance of a stable society of a kind. There will always be bumps, in which prosperity and stability and an outward-looking politics can be preserved. But it's going to be a very tough fight, and I do admire all of you who concentrate on the business of not just listening to politicians' speeches like this one, but getting on with how you assess the future and how you think you can create a future in which work and investment and creativity are properly rewarded. Thank you very much indeed.